Welcome to It's a Disaster. I'm Dan Parsons. On each episode of It's a Disaster, we'll analyze the most bizarre public relations disasters that are making headlines and blowing up social media. We'll discuss what went right, what went wrong, and what I would have counseled to do differently. For the past 2 years, I've had more crisis PR clients than I've had in the past 20. I've spent 3 decades helping solve some of the most challenging and sometimes bizarre communications problems you could imagine. Most crisis communications clients tend to call me a day late. So I think having a podcast that talks about PR disasters is needed, and hopefully we can help. So let me introduce my guest tonight, Matt Wynn is Executive Director of the Nebraska Journalism Trust, which launched and funds Flatwater Free Press,
That's right.
Nebraska's first independent nonprofit newsroom focused on investigations and feature stories. And Matt, if you allow me to embellish a little bit, you were the editor of the investigation desk at USA Today. You were awarded the Goldsmith Prize for investigative reporting. Is that like a trophy?
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. It's a whole thing.
Something you put on the mantle.
Yeah, it's like the cup in hockey. It goes place to place. It's
and you've also spent time as a reporter for the Omaha World Herald and other newspapers around the country.
Yeah.
Matt, I couldn't think of anyone better qualified to talk about PR crisis on the premiere episode of It's a Disaster than Matt Wynn.
I am so freaking flattered to be here, by the way. This is a great idea, and I'm so excited to see it take off.
Well, you're very kind to take time out, because I want you to talk about some of the great developments that Flatwater Free Press has been doing recently.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're in this huge growth phase right now. We've been around for 16 months or something like that. We announced recently we acquired Silicon Prairie News, which actually dovetails with our topic today. I was thrilled to see that. We've got a couple hires coming. It's a really good time to be the Flatwater Free Press. New office, all sorts of good things going on. So.
Yeah, well, I'm so delighted. Well, here's our disaster of the day. And let me just introduce it by talking about a tweet that I happened to see about a year ago, Monday, February 7th of 2022, at 2:44 p.m. in the afternoon. I noticed this on Twitter, and here's the tweet. Buildertrend, one of your employees just called a flight attendant on my Delta flight the N-word and is being kicked off for that and for not wearing a mask. Pro tip, if you're going to send a whole BDR team on a plane and they're going to be assholes, don't give them masks with your logo. That's the tweet. They were live tweeting from the Delta plane at Omaha Eppley Airfield. And here was my response. I retweeted, again, this is February of 2022. I retweeted, it's 2022. Your hashtag crisis PR plan should include a section on anti-mask, vax, and racist remarks on airlines and other public places. Oh, and rethink that branded swag. So what a terrible, terrible moment for this tech company in Omaha to allow their employees to go into the airport. So anyway, we've talked about this in the before we got ready for the show today, but talk a little bit about the story. I assume you remember it.
Yeah, no, I remember. First of all, I remember that day. I remember these tweets. I'm sure yours was one of the tweets that I took in that day, but it was just fast and furious. The comments, people who had never before heard of Buildertrend, which I think is a really important concept if you're running this, company that's a crown jewel in some ways of Omaha startup scene. suddenly they're hearing about it, and it's in this context. There are people who were drunk, throwing around racial slurs, stopping flights from taking off. I mean, what a disaster.
It was
not
a
to get too
disaster.
cute. It's what I think happened, reading the stories back then. It was the day of that flight. They were going to some retreat in Orlando, if memory serves.
Yeah.
The flight got canceled. They had another route they were going to take. And so they had been in the airport for a while. We've all been there, right? It happens.
That's
You
what
have
we
one
do.
drink.
Yep.
You have two drinks. Now your flight's canceled. We can see how this happens to a point. But they were on the tarmac. They had been sitting there for a while on this now rescheduled flight, a different airline, and they're out of control. And then they kind of go beyond the pale. And this is what happens. This is how it took off.
Here's the so the Omaha World Herald did a really good story on Tuesday. So that was Monday when it happened. On Tuesday, the Omaha World Herald reported on Buildertrend, an Omaha-based company that specializes in cloud-based construction project management software. And they responded on Twitter that is looking into the incident. And here's what they said. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We are doing our best to learn more. Plainly, we do not stand by any such behavior, the company replied. A spokesperson for Buildertrend said Tuesday morning that the company is, quote, taking this incident very seriously and apologized to the passengers who experienced a disruption as a result. So they did respond.
Yeah. I'm curious that there's kind of two things there. On that day of, it was a social media shitstorm. That's what was happening, right? They did do the tweet response, and you just read it there. In that moment, if you were counseling these guys, what do you think of that move at that time?
To their credit, they did respond. They didn't put out probably as a complete statement because, again, they were trying to gather the facts.
Sure.
So I'll give them credit that they did respond fairly quickly. But boy, just reading this this Twitter feed from that day, I mean, you talk about a disaster.
Yeah.
And I mean, they were live tweeting. This person, Ibby, whoever Ibby is, was live tweeting the incident as they see it. As we were talking earlier, I'm a little surprised there wasn't video.
Exactly. This is 2022. This is not the Stone Age. There's no video of this long, drawn-out, drunken mess happening on a plane. Are you kidding? How did that happen? Small victory. Way to go, Buildertrend.
Exactly. I mean, some of the tweets that day. There was actually a reporter from KMTV. Hello, I'm a reporter with KMTV looking into this incident. I'd like to talk with you more about what you saw and heard. Feel free to DM me.
Yeah.
I don't know that person did that. And that's when Buildertrend then, to their credit, thank you for bringing this to our attention. But the tweets that day and the next were just brutal.
They were brutal and they were on. I remember I saw it in real time and then I still saw it top of my feed later that night, right? I mean, this was happening. People were judging this company. Like it was ongoing. It was brutal. And it lasted till the next, like you said, there was the World Herald response the next day, that story. And that was still just the beginning. We had a couple days left of this thing to go.
And it's just brutal. To be fair, no one plans on your employees. We'll talk about this more about how you should plan. But nobody plans on this kind of a PR disaster in your day-to-day activities.
Yeah. I mean, and it's weird to we're talking about PR here, and I realize that, but it's hard to differentiate the PR aspect of this from, are you kidding me? You've got employees who use that kind of language. You've got a drunken situation going on, period, and then the employees choose to. What are you doing? You've got other problems by the time you arrive at this point.
There's obviously some vetting problems. Well, so then on February 9, so this started on Monday, the 7th. The World Herald story lands on Tuesday, the 8th. By February 9th, Buildertrend CEO does put out a statement.
Okay.
And let me just read part of it. Buildertrend has always been and will continue to be an inclusive and principled partner to our communities, customers, and people. Since learning Monday of reports involving our employees, we have been actively investigating the incident with internal and external parties to learn as much as possible so that we can take appropriate action. We take these accounts of unacceptable behavior extremely seriously.
Yeah.
Okay? A for effort. Those are the right words to say. Based on actions that do not align with Buildertrend's values and standards of conduct, one employee has been terminated. So
2 days later.
2 days later, they fired the one employee. We can assume that employee is the one that used the racial slur.
Let's hope.
But that took 2 days to happen. We continue to investigate the incident and are working diligently to determine all the requisite next steps. They go on to say, we share the frustration, disgust, and concern that may express in the wake of this incident. It is our promise to continue being outstanding stewards of our community and our employees. We will learn from this experience and to continue to grow as a company, said the CEO. So, we don't know some of the internal workings.
Sure.
Obviously, HR is going to get involved. Obviously, the lawyers are going to get involved at that point. And so to be fair, we don't know what those internal workings are. But just from a public relations standpoint, I have some concerns of what went right, what went wrong, and just some of the details that, of this company. So let me just say, here's what I think they did right. Credit for responding fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And for being sensitive to the horrendous nature of their comments.
Right, they owned it.
They did. They owned it. But here's what they did wrong, in my opinion. I'll go back to my tweet that I retweeted that day that it happened. I retweeted and said, it's 2022. Your crisis PR plan should include a section on anti-mask and vax and racial and racist remarks on airlines and other public places. Oh, and rethink that branded swag. So Matt, I think for me, in that, let's just remember, this was just a year ago. Yeah. So we were still in the middle of a COVID crisis. What public entity didn't recognize the very fragile nature of our culture at that point when it came to two things? The mask mandate. Mm-hmm. Certainly, Black Lives Matter was roaring in public awareness at that point. You have an employee who gets publicly drunk. You have an employee who is so racially insensitive, they're throwing around the most horrendous racial epithet that could be imagined in a public place. Oh, and by the way, you have your brand on your apparel, on your face mask.
Which they weren't wearing. So, hey, maybe it's not a problem at all, right?
My goodness. How could you be so naive, so irresponsible? Yeah. And again, we don't know what the internal workings are. Maybe they had seminar after seminar with their employees who were going out in public.
You would hope they would, as a result of this. I mean, this does speak, again, when you have so many norms that fall by the wayside to get to this point. They had to get drunk, and they had to be comfortable getting drunk enough to be rowdy in public.
Yep.
And then someone goes, I mean, would you say that word less drunk if you were in your office setting? I don't know, but it sure raises the specter of that being a possibility. There are some serious problems that this raises, some serious questions about the company culture that it raises for me. I would also, I'm a journalist, skeptical guy, always going to have this angle. But when you said one employee got drunk, maybe that's part of the PR win here. They fired one guy.
Yep.
But the stories were that there were dozens, 20 plus. I mean, there were some serious big numbers thrown about there. One person took the fall, and we don't even really know who it was.
And we don't. I don't think it was ever reported. And yeah, again, we don't know some of that backstory, but it's safe to say that that was, from a public relations perspective, I don't think there was anything in our culture. There were two things, and I mentioned earlier that I've done more PR crisis moments in the past few years than I've done in many years prior. And some of that work that I've done had to do with COVID, and it also had to do with Black Lives Matter, because both of those were big issues in public. So as a responsible organization, whether you're a government entity, you're a corporation, you're a nonprofit, you have to know what's going on in the culture and be able to coach up your team.
Yeah, I think I'm also curious, you've mentioned that more in the past 2 years than the past 20. That is so shocking to me, but I think this is really indicative of why, right? That arguably, that Tuesday World Herald story doesn't come if there isn't first the tweet storm, shitstorm on Monday. Was it the event itself, which was horrendous and awful, or was it the reaction, the speed, sled down a hill effect that thing picked up that led to the coverage?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. And for God's sake, whose idea was it to brand the masks? I mean, let's draw attention to the most sensitive cultural issue of our time of wearing masks.
Immediately divisive.
Again, I get it from the marketing team won that day, right? The marketing team. Yep. What's the most noticeable thing and we'll encourage our employees to wear their masks because they're going to be positioning our company in a positive manner.
And I do, like we were saying earlier, I do understand, we're putting our logo on stuff. Everybody needs a mask. Oh, cool. But God, yeah, a little bit of next level thought on that would have
So
been
that's
useful.
what they did right. I'll give them credit for responding fairly quickly and being sensitive to the words and the language that was used. But what went wrong is they did not prepare well enough for a crisis like this, and they should have seen it coming.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be back for the rest of the story.
Right?
Dan Parsons is Nebraska's leading public relations expert, advising community leaders, business executives, and policymakers on the most important issues of our day.
In today's turbulent and unpredictable times, businesses, government agencies, and nonprofits need every advantage they can get. Public relations is about cutting through the clutter, establishing relationships that move your ideas into action. Parsons PR will connect you to the policymakers, journalists, and community leaders that matter, delivering results that speak to your core values and move your audience into action. A wise person once said, "Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some hire public relations experts." Well, welcome back to It's a Disaster. And thank you, Matt Wynn, for joining us. It's so good
Pleasure.
to have a journalist help dissect some of these incredible public relations disasters. So
fun.
thanks. So there is more to this story. And
no.
Yeah, there really is. So who's the Weather Channel guy that shows up? Is it Jim Satori? Is that his
I think
name?
that's his name. Yeah, sure.
When he shows up in your community, you know you're in for a bad day because it's about to go sideways with weather. Well, the same could be said of a journalist, a longtime investigative journalist here in Nebraska by the name of Joe Jordan.
Absolutely.
Joe Jordan with Nebraska News Channel Nebraska wrote a story that dovetailed into this. And Joe wrote this story. So let's remember, on Monday, the drunks get on the plane and start throwing around racial epithets. On Tuesday, one of them gets fired. On Tuesday, the World Herald reports on the story. Wednesday, somebody gets fired. On Thursday, Joe Jordan shows up with this story from News Channel Nebraska. The headline is, Buildertrend execs apologize for Epley incident while bankrolling Lindstrom's bid for governor.
Oh my God.
The subhead is top management of an Omaha company, a company making headlines for disrupting a flight out of Epley Airfield, is heavily bankrolling one of the top 4 Republican campaigns for governor. This is an amazing story, and that only Joe could report on. According to state campaign records, State Senator Brent Lindstrom's bid for the governor's mansion has raised $1.6 million, a respectable amount of money, with at least $1.2 million of the $1.6 million coming from 3 Buildertrend executives, one of 3 pumping in 7 figures. Company co-founders have each shelled out $100,000. Fellow co-founder has poured in $1 million.
Of the 1.6 million total of his war chest, yeah.
1.2 came from this one company.
Man, kudos to Joe, by the way. He is a Nebraska legend for a reason. You love seeing this guy in a press conference that you're in because, well, he's got it. We'll just sit here and ride his coattails to success, you know?
Joe goes on to report the $100,000 contributions are significant amounts, but not unheard of in Nebraska politics. You sometimes, again, there's no limits for state offices, not like federal offices where there are limits. State offices have no limits. We used to have one, but it was ruled unconstitutional some years back. So $100,000 contribution, fairly rare, not unheard of. However, the $1 million from one person who's an exec in this company is a figure seldom seen on finance reports, except from wealthy individuals who have a lot of money. We've known those people maybe contribute that much, but not from a single donor.
Yeah.
So that set them apart on top of just days after this horrific news story.
Now, so the timing, was that a new quarterly report, or had Joe dug back into a previous report and said, hey, these guys that are currently in the news for this disaster, turns out they also done something notable that went unreported previously.
As I remember it, Matt, this was the first it had been reported.
God.
News Channel Nebraska has tried to contact both Lindstrom and his campaign to comment, but we've not heard back. A spokeswoman for Buildertrend did tell Nebraska News Channel Nebraska that Buildertrend, quote, does not comment or endorse political parties. We are unable to speak on behalf of Mr. Lindstrom's campaign or his relationships.
Rough day for Buildertrend PR. I mean, rough week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
So that, again, they should have been prepared for that. When their top execs are giving $1.2 million to a political campaign in Nebraska, that's almost never done. It's unheard of. They should have been prepared for that. And frankly, I'm not going to comment on Senator Lindstrom's comment or no comment. That's not what our podcast is about today. We probably could do some political crisis management.
It'd be fun. We could make this an hour if we want to.
I mentioned one to you earlier that I was involved in, but that's another show. But they should have been prepared to answer that question.
Yeah, it's interesting. What's the deal? Money is speech now, and that sort of thing. But really, it makes you consider, if they had not given those donations, this terrible event in their relatively short company history, would have been capped at 3 days. This extended it.
It did extend it. And it spilled over into the gubernatorial race. Did not help Senator Lindstrom to reveal that, 99% of his, or I'm terrible at math, but whatever.
It's less than that.
It's less than that. You're good at math because you do math. But yeah, from 1.6 million that he had raised at that point, 1.2 had come from those three execs.
Yeah,
of that company.
75% is
Thank
where
you.
we're at.
Thank you.
Anytime.
75%. So anyway, I find that interesting.
So how can you blunt this? What can they do? I mean, one thing that I know is interesting when you mentioned this was today's topic. First of all, I was thrilled because I love this. We did the Silicon Prairie acquisition, and this has been the example that I've given everyone.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well,
There's some big news that Flatwater Free Press made just recently.
Sure. Silicon Prairie News, a long time when I first moved back to Omaha, really, they were one of the three reasons I could look at their coverage and I could say, man, there's really cool stuff going back on in my hometown.
Rod Armstrong, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, just so many people were involved in that. I respected what they were up to. They did Big Omaha. They did all these things. AIM Institute has stewarded that thing marvelously for the past couple of years. And they actually came to us and said, look, you guys we're doing content. You're doing journalism. This should be journalism. Let's do that. And so it's been a whole months-long process. And seriously, this example is the one that I keep trotting out as, look, the next time some Omaha startup, I don't care who they are, wanders into some Mr. Magoo's their way into a situation like this, we're going to cover it unflinchingly. Yeah. That's part of it needs to be journalistic. That needs to be first and foremost.
Well, and to be fair, to Parsons Public Relations, we're in the startup community in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're
in it right now, right?
Fuse Co-working. And I've chosen my office space here because I want to support the growth of startups and the growth of business in not only Lincoln, but Nebraska.
Yeah.
And just the excitement around the startup community.
There's nothing like it. And that's the reason, truly, that's the reason I'm so excited about Silicon Prairie News. That's the reason that we want to be part of this the same way that you're part of this by being here. There's definite value to it. There's excitement, there's energy, but there's also a little bit of, we can't let it get to the point where these things happen. There needs to be somebody being the morality police, so to speak.
Room.
Yeah. And that's never going to be fun, but that's part of what has to happen.
Yeah.
But how much damage control, if they had done this as you would have counseled? Okay, we were looking back at the coverage back then, and still to this day, if you Google Buildertrend Omaha,
it still pops up.
It's still there. It's the number 1 or 2 hit.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
It is.
Do you think there would have been a different outcome if you had been involved, if they had done some things differently?
Well, again, without knowing some of the
Sure.
front end things that from an HR perspective, that they may have coached during this potentially crisis atmosphere of again, Black Lives Matter and the COVID response, we don't know what they did. Whatever they did, it wasn't that effective, at least not for every employee. But here's the 3 things that I coach our clients to think about when it comes to PR crisis. First of all, you need to identify your crisis communications team, your HR department, your legal department, your marketing department, and of course your executive team. Be able to sit down with that team to say, okay, when we have a crisis, not if, when we have a crisis, here's who's going to be on the team. So that's number 1. Number 2, of that team, who are your spokespeople? And again, I give them credit. Their CEO came out along with their spokesperson, and they did some things right. But what they probably did not do right, that we always coach, is you have to anticipate these crises. And again, in that culture that was predominant across the landscape, whether you were in government, nonprofit, or for-profit business, you had to anticipate, especially when you're sending your employees out in a public mode.
A ton of your employees.
Yeah.
A boatload, a plane load.
You had to be prepared for that. So that's what we coach. And so the good and the bad and the ugly. That's what it is. Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough.
This has been fun, Dan. Anytime. I love this.
We will put in our notes of how people, if they're not subscribed to Flatwater Free Press, how they can read your great work on a daily and weekly basis.
Yeah, we can also just say it. They can go to flatwaterfreepress.org, hit subscribe, and it's free. They'll get it every week.
And it's free, and you distribute that news to anyone, any other news organizations.
Absolutely. Every newspaper, every radio station, TV station. Occasionally these things go national. It's just, it's really humbling how much this thing has taken off.
Well, I couldn't be more pleased to be a fan. So let me thank the rest of our sponsors and staff. Right Eye Digital, Christian Anderson is our executive producer. Mad Owl Films, Grant Parsons is our senior producer. Kim Remington, operations manager at Parsons Public Relations. And our sponsor, Parsons Public Relations, Inc., the leading Nebraska public relations consultant. And our guest, Matt Wynn, Flatwater Free Press.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks.
This is fun.
You bet.